What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be updating my Week 5 top 40 wide receiver rankings. Already went through my running backs. If you haven't seen those, you can check it out after this one. But for this video, splitting up the top 40 wide receivers into different tiers, let's just dive right into tier 1. We're going to have 4 guys in this tier. It is going to be Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins. Don't think it's shocking that any of these guys are in this tier. Justin Jefferson's been great to start off the season. CeeDee Lamb has that proven production. Wide receiver 1 last year. Not the best start to this season, but he should be fine. Jamar Chase has been an animal over the past couple of weeks. And then you have Nico Collins, who is the wide receiver 2 in points per game on the season. It does look like the Texans are getting Tank Dell back, but Nico Collins is going to produce regardless. And then I do think this would just be a good opportunity to talk about some of the players that I don't think are going to play this week, guys that I'm assuming are out or have already been ruled out. So one of those dudes, Malik Nabers, would be in this tier if I thought he was going to play. With him suffering a concussion on Thursday Night Football, I thought he'd have a decent chance to kind of turn around a week plus to pass the concussion protocol and play here in Week 5. At this point, it seems like he is still in the early stages of that process. So if I had to make a bet, I would lean towards him not playing this week. Obviously, if he plays as a concussion, so it's not like he'd be limited. Either he's good or he's not. So if he's playing, obviously he's in your lineup. But for this video and where I'm ranking a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, it is going to be under the assumption that Malik Nabers is not playing. We have Devontae Adams, who looks like he's not going to go with his hamstring. Rashee Rice, it seems like he might have dodged the torn ACL. We don't really know, but he's not going to be playing this week. We have Christian Watson, who's going to be out with that ankle injury, and then Cooper Kupp out again with his ankle. So now starting into tier 2 here, we're going to go with DK Metcalf as my wide receiver 5. He's had a very strong start to the season, operating as the clear-cut wide receiver 1 here for the Seahawks, and I do think this team's going to put up points against the Giants. Then I have Chris Olave, had kind of a down week 1, but week 2, decent game. Very strong week 3, week 4. I think this is going to be a favorable game script for these pass catchers. Probably going to be trailing. The passing volume should be there. I really like Chris Olave moving forward. And then I have Marvin Harrison Jr. Aside from week 1, he has had a very, very strong start to his rookie year, kind of overshadowed by just how insane Malik Nabers has been. But Marvin Harrison Jr. has also been very, very productive. Then I have these Bucs wide receivers back-to-back, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. Do slightly prefer Chris Godwin. He's the wide receiver 5 in points per game, but both these guys are solid wide receiver 1s this week. And then behind those two, I have Deontay Johnson. We've got to give this man some respect. With Bryce Young, it looked like he was going to be unplayable for fantasy. Andy Dalton comes in. He goes 8 for 122 and a touchdown in week 3. Then he goes 7 for 83 and a touchdown in week 4. He has commanded 27 targets over the last 2 weeks. So I feel like at this point, you fire him up as a wide receiver 1 with a lot of confidence. Another guy who's a huge riser here, Jaden Reed. In his 2 games with Jordan Love at quarterback, he has put up 33.1 and 27.1 PPR points. So 2 monster games. I think this is a pretty solid matchup here against the Rams. I like Jaden Reed as a top 12 guy. And then to wrap up this tier, I have Drake London. I think this is a pretty favorable matchup here going up against the Bucs. Drake London, has had a nice, 3 stretch of games here. So I like Drake London to wrap up my wide receiver 1s here. Now pivoting into tier 3, going to start off this tier with Deebo Samuel. This is going to be a crowded target room. You have Brandon Ayuk, you have George Kittle, but at this point, I think you have to view Deebo as the wide receiver 1. Ayuk has really struggled to start off the season. Deebo returned from injury in week 4. Should be a nice option here. 49ers also are number 1 in implied points this week. Then I have Garrett Wilson going up against the Vikings. And things are kind of getting concerning here with Garrett Wilson because he had the rough start to the season, had some tough matchups early on. This Jets passing attack hasn't looked great. Doesn't seem like him and Rodgers are like on the exact same page here. He has a decent matchup this week. The Vikings are top 5 in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. But now we're looking at Devontae Adams. Seems like if he gets traded, it's very likely going to be to the Packers. So like Garrett Wilson, drafted in the first round, at latest like early round 2, has struggled through 4 weeks. Now might end up being the wide receiver 2 moving forward within the next couple of weeks. So kind of concerning here. Hopefully you get him into your lineup. He has a big game. Maybe you can pivot, if that's something you're interested in doing. But after Garrett Wilson, going with T. Higgins here, going up against the Ravens, the Bengals are 5th in implied points. This should be a pretty favorable game script for these pass catchers. And I do just like T. Higgins as a player. I think he has that like fringe wide receiver one upside as long as him and Burrow are healthy together. And then a guy I'm very high on, Brian Thomas Jr., going up against the Colts. The Jaguars are fourth in implied points. Brian Thomas Jr., 4 games into his NFL career, is averaging 14.4 PPR points per game. In my opinion, he's the clear wide receiver one here. I think he's just going to continue to get better and better. So big fan of Brian Thomas Jr., and I like him this week, especially with the matchup. Then I have Stephon Diggs. Like I talked about with Nico Collins, I do think Tank Dell is back this week, but Stephon Diggs has played very well through 4 weeks. Think he's a nice wide receiver too. Then I'm going with Rashid Shaheed, and he was someone I was kind of skeptical of after 2 weeks. I know he had 2 really nice games, but they were kind of carried by 2 long touchdowns. He goes out week 3, has the goose egg, but he actually still had like a fine target share in that game. I believe it was still above 20%. Then he goes out week 4, doesn't hit on like a monster touchdown, but commands a career high 11 targets. He's put up 15 PPR points in 3 of his 4 games. I think he's a fun option moving forward, and I'm definitely getting higher on him rest of season. So that's going to wrap it up for tier 3. Now looking at tier 4, I'm going to start off this tier by talking about Terry McLaurin. Had a rough start to the season, week 1, week 2, not a ton of production. When you look at week 3 and week 4, he's combined for 11 receptions for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jane Daniels is playing at a very high level. I do think this game will be telling because this is a massive, uptick in terms of like the quality of defense they're going up against. So hopefully we see Jane Daniels continue to play well. Terry's obviously going to be his number 1 target. And then I have Tyreek Hill. It's just been a real pain to rank these Dolphins wide receivers because talent-wise, like Tyreek Hill should be ranked way higher than this. You drafted him wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, probably at the latest. And now you're playing him as like a mid to back end wide receiver 2. But he has scored under 9 PPR points in 3 straight weeks. This Dolphins offense without Tua has looked really bad. So I still think talent-wise, he could have a big breakout game, but obviously he is no longer a lock in your lineup with the production we have seen with no Tua. Then I have Brandon Ayuk. Like I talked about with Debo, he's been wildly underwhelming to start off the season, only averaging 7.4 PPR points per game. But I do think this 49ers offense is going to put up points. They are first in implied points, and obviously he is a good wide receiver. So hopefully this is just a slow start because he wasn't at training camp, had the contract dispute, and he'll start to get going moving forward. Then I have Zay Flowers. Starting to become a little bit concerned here with Zay Flowers because I feel like he's turning into someone who is very game script dependent, where we see the Ravens, they go up if they're leading in games. There's just not going to be enough passing volume to support a guy like Zay Flowers or the tight ends who have both been very disappointing over the past couple of weeks or the last 3 weeks. So for Zay Flowers, I do think this is an interesting spot where this Bengals offense can put up points. It could be competitive. But I think moving forward, like this is a very, very good Ravens team. I don't think they're going to be underdogs in many games, if any, rest of season. So there's some concern long term, but this week, I think he's a fine wide receiver too. Then I have DJ Moore going up against the Panthers. Hasn't been the best start for DJ Moore. I do think he's probably trending up rest of season, just hoping this offense kind of makes some improvements. Caleb Williams kind of settles in here. And then I have Amari Cooper. This should be a good matchup here. The Commanders have allowed the most points per game to the wide receiver position, but I've got Deshaun Watson concerns. I now have Amari Cooper concerns. I've been, kind of negative on Deshaun Watson. Through 3 weeks, he had a ton of passing volume, but hadn't hit 200 passing yards. He only had 3 passing touchdowns. Kind of felt like that was the limiting factor here on Amari Cooper, but Cooper has not played well. I believe he's leading the league in drops. Had a pretty egregious drop turned into an interception last week. So he needs to be better. Deshaun Watson, you'd like him to be better, but right now, kind of like that fringe wide receiver 2 territory with the plus matchup. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Jordan Addison. I think he's definitely trending up rest of season. Coming in, you didn't know if there would be enough volume, if this offense could support, a second target outside of Justin Jefferson. It clearly can. He comes back 3 for 72 and a touchdown. He gets a 7-yard carry, also gets into the end zone on the ground. So Jordan Addison, think he's an interesting option this week. Not the best matchup against the Jets, but still think he's very playable. Now looking at tier 5, I'm starting it off with Wan'Dale Robinson. And after the first couple of weeks, he had some decent games. I wasn't super convinced. At this point, I feel like we have to take him seriously here. He is averaging 13.2 PPR points per game. He has been targeted 38 times in 4 games, so nearly 10 targets a game. That's legit. Malik Neighbors has also just been funneled targets. if I'm assuming he's out, I feel like Wan'Dale Robinson is going to have a lot of volume in this matchup, especially could be a trailing game script, lots of passing volume out there. I think Wan'Dale Robinson definitely in like that fringe wide receiver 2 area. Then I have Dontavian Wicks going up against the Rams. Dontavian Wicks is someone who I really liked as like a wide receiver handcuff heading into the year. You had the top 3 of Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed. Dontavian Wicks was that guy where he can play outside, he can play in the slot. It just depends on like who went down with injury, or maybe he just outright earned a starting spot. Christian Watson goes down. Dontavian Wicks steps into a starting role. What does he do? Commands 13 targets, catches 5 of them for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. Think he is very, very playable this week as a high-end wide receiver 3. Then I'm going to go with Christian Kirk here going up against the Colts. He's seen some really nice volume over the last 2 weeks, 22 total targets. I do have some concerns if Evan Ingram plays in this game. I feel like when Kirk and Ingram play together, they kind of cap each other's ceilings because they're both kind of working up the middle. Both rely on volume. They're not like super big play options. So if Ingram plays, probably would be a little bit less excited with Christian Kirk, but still think he's in like that wide receiver 3 range. Then I have Xavier Worthy, and I think he's kind of an interesting guy here with the Rashee Rice injury. At this point, we don't really know exactly what that is, but he is going to be the wide receiver 1 for as long as Rashee Rice is out. The issue here, though, is you would think like, all right, he's just going to get launched into that role. Targets are earned at the wide receiver position. They're not just given. He has not proven yet that he can command those targets. Like he is maxed out at 4 targets, which he's a big play guy. We saw last week, the long touchdown. We saw week 1. He has the explosive play upside. He can get into the end zone. But in terms of having a floor, it's still kind of questionable at this point. So I would assume he gets, more than 4 targets this week with no Rashee Rice. But I don't know if I'm just like ready to vault him up into like that wide receiver 2 territory. If Rashee Rice does miss an extended amount of time, I do think he will get into that area. Like I have confidence that it'll happen. I just don't know if it's going to happen right away here in week 5. Then I have George Pickens, who is coming off the best game of the season for him, 7 for 113. Nice mid-tier wide receiver 3 option. Then I'm going with Khalil Shakir going up against the Texans, averaging 13.3 PPR points per game. Not a great week 4 for this Bills offense, but Shakir, a solid play. We have Tank Dell back in the lineup. I was really high on Tank Dell heading into the season. I'm not giving up hope. I still think he is going to be very productive. We saw like a 3-game sample size of him with those other wide receivers. He didn't have many great games in there. I think he is going to get his. He's too talented not to, in my opinion, and on too good of an offense. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Jackson Smith and Jigba. And this might seem low. It even, kind of feels low saying it here. But I have not been overly impressed with his target earning ability and then also the opportunities he's actually getting. So his actual target number isn't bad, but he's the wide receiver 33 in points per game, and he has the 38th highest target share at the wide receiver position, which is not good considering the fact that he's not really being used downfield, averaging 1 deep target a game, and then he's not really getting targeted in the red zone. So if the target share is not great, he doesn't have that touchdown upside, and he doesn't really have the big play upside, being used down the field, I feel like he's just very capped. And we've seen 2 big target earning games. The other 2 haven't been great, so it's not even like the floor is overly high. Those are kind of my thoughts on JSN. Could it get better? Sure, but a little bit underwhelmed through 4 weeks. And then the final tier here, tier 6, definitely some interesting options in here. You have guys on bye weeks, you need a flex. First guy here is going to be Jacoby Myers. This is tough because he's probably going to draw the Pat Surtain matchup with no Devontae Adams here. But it's this weird mix because he commanded a lot of volume last week. No Adams, you'd assume he's commanding a lot of volume again. You'd also assume a decent amount of passing volume with a trailing game script here. So I think Myers is playable even with the matchup. And then I have Cortland Sutton in that same game. He's commanded 9 or more targets in 3 out of 4 games. This Broncos passing attack has been pretty rough, but as it starts to develop, Sutton definitely becomes interesting. Then I have Darnell Mooney going up against the Buccaneers here. He's averaging 13.7 PPR points per game in his last 3. Definitely been a real factor for this Falcons offense. Then I have Jordan Whittington going up against the Packers. He actually led the Rams in routes and targets last week. He turned it into 6 receptions for 62 yards. Someone who is going to get fed volume. Definitely a fine play, especially in like PPR formats. Then I have Romeo Doubs. He led all Packers wide receivers in routes. I definitely don't think he has as much upside as like a Jaden Reed or a Dontavian Wicks, but could he be playable as a flex option? Like, sure. Then I have Jerry Jeudy, also gets the benefit of the plus matchup here against the Commanders, averaging 11.4 PPR points per game, has put up 8 or more PPR points in 4 to 4 weeks. So he's been pretty consistent on a passing attack that's not great. Definitely someone who's interesting, especially if Amari Cooper gets traded. Like if Cooper gets moved, Jerry Jeudy is a very interesting fantasy play. And then the final guy here, it is going to be Tutu Atwell going up against the Packers. He was second in routes behind Jordan Whittington. He has put up 80 plus yards in back-to-back games. We also have that sample size last year where with Cooper Kupp out, first 3 games of the season, Tutu Atwell was balling. So totally playable as like a flex option. And then some honorable mentions here. We have Michael Pittman. I'm assuming Richardson is playing. If Richardson is not playing, I mean, fire up Pittman as a wide receiver 2. Fire up Josh Downs, probably in like that tier 5 area. So this is going to be assuming that Anthony Richardson is a quarterback. If Richardson's at quarterback, I just don't want to play Pittman. We have 3 full games of it, and it's not pretty. Trey Tucker, honestly interesting. If you're super scared of that like Jacoby Myers matchup with Pat Surtain on him, Tucker's had back-to-back nice games. So if you don't like that, spot for Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker could be your guy. Roma Dunze, I guess, but still kind of uncertain here how he is going to produce when you have all the Bears weapons healthy. But that's going to wrap it up for my top 40 wide receiver rankings. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.